The war in Europe was nearing its brutal final chapter. Inside a dimly lit operations room somewhere in France, maps covered the walls. Red and blue lines carved across paper like scars. Officers moved quietly, boots clicking on the floor, voices low, tense. At the center of it all stood George S. Patton, helmet under one arm, ivory-handled pistols at his belt, eyes sharp, restless, like a man already 3 steps ahead of the battle. But tonight, something was wrong. Patton had requested updated reconnaissance reports from a nearby unit, vital intel about German defensive positions ahead of his advancing army. What he received made his jaw tighten. The numbers didn't match. Enemy artillery positions were missing. Supply depots were marked in the wrong places. Roads listed as clear were actually mined days ago. This wasn't a simple mistake. It was dangerous. Deadly dangerous. A quiet suspicion. Patton didn't yell. He didn't slam his fist. That's what everyone expected. Instead, he leaned over the map table, studying it in silence. Around him, staff officers shifted uncomfortably. Finally, he spoke. Calm, low, controlled. This report is either written by a fool or someone who wants American soldiers walking into a trap. No one breathed. He turned to his intelligence officer. Who signed off on this? A name was given. An officer Patton had trusted. A man who had served under him for months. Efficient, polite, always by the book. 2 by the book. The pattern, no one else. Saw Patton didn't accuse him. Not yet. Instead, he ordered older reports pulled. Supply logs, recon photos, patrol debriefs. Hour after hour, he stood there comparing papers himself while others grew tired. And then he saw it. Small errors. Not big enough to raise alarms, but always in the same direction. Underestimating enemy strength, overestimating road safety, mislabeling terrain that could slow tanks. Not random. A pattern. Someone inside his command wasn't just making mistakes. They were quietly trying to slow Patton's advance. Why that was dangerous. Patton's Third Army was famous for speed, for hitting hard before the enemy could react. If his units hesitated, if they moved cautiously based on bad intel, the Germans would have time to regroup. Every delay could cost lives. Patton straightened up. His voice was ice. We are not being sabotaged from the outside. He looked around the room. We are being delayed from within. The room went silent, because now everyone understood. This wasn't just paperwork. This was betrayal, and General Patton did not forgive betrayal. General George S. Patton didn't believe in coincidences. If someone inside his command was feeding bad intelligence, he wouldn't confront them directly. He would make them expose themselves. The next morning, Patton gathered his senior officers inside the command tent. His tone was calm, controlled, almost casual, too casual. Spread across the table was a new set of operational plans. Routes for armored divisions, timing for artillery movements, supply columns, and reconnaissance sweeps. But what no one in the room knew was that 2 versions of those plans existed. The false road. In the meeting, Patton deliberately emphasized one particular route, a narrow forest road supposedly safe for rapid tank movement. He tapped it with his riding crop. This, he said firmly, is where we'll hit them hardest. Several officers nodded. One did not. Just for a fraction of a second, that officer hesitated. His eyes flicked down, then back up. Patton saw it. He saw everything. A message. Sent quietly. Later that afternoon, Patton ordered a small, trusted reconnaissance patrol to quietly check the safe forest road. They returned before midnight. Breathless. The road was a death trap. Freshly planted mines, hidden anti-tank guns, camouflaged artillery positions zeroed in on the clearing. The enemy was waiting exactly where the false plan said American armor would be, which meant only one thing. Someone had leaked it. No explosion, no arrest. Patton didn't storm into the officer's tent, didn't shout, didn't accuse. Instead, the next morning he calmly announced a sudden change of plans. "We attack at dawn, from the southern ridge instead." The room was confused. Officers scrambled to adjust. But Patton's eyes were locked on just one man, and that man had gone pale. Because he knew. He knew the Germans weren't waiting on the southern ridge. They were waiting on the road Patton had pretended to choose. The trap hadn't been for the enemy. It had been for the traitor. And now, Patton knew exactly who it was. Dawn came with a low gray sky and the distant rumble of artillery, but not from where the enemy expected. General George S. Patton stood outside his command tent, gloves on, helmet under his arm, watching the southern ridge through binoculars. American tanks rolled forward there instead, engines roaring, infantry advancing fast, artillery already softening resistance. The Germans were caught off guard, because they had been waiting somewhere else, waiting on the forest road, waiting for a plan that was never real. The man who knew behind Patton, the suspected officer, stood stiffly, trying to look calm, trying not to look at the general. But Patton didn't need to see his face. He already knew. An hour later, reports came in. Minimal resistance on the ridge, enemy lines breaking, several German positions abandoned in confusion. Patton lowered his binoculars. Victory was moving forward exactly as he intended. Then he turned. "Walk with me," he said quietly. The officer followed. No guards, no shouting, just boots crunching over gravel. The conversation no one heard. They stopped beside a line of parked jeeps. Patton didn't look at him right away. He spoke while watching tanks in the distance. "Funny thing about war," Patton said calmly. "The enemy out there, I respect him." A pause. "The enemy inside my command, I do not." The officer's hands trembled slightly. Patton finally looked at him, not angry, not loud, just certain. "You passed along information you thought would slow us down. Maybe you thought it would save lives. Maybe you thought I was reckless." Another pause. "But you don't get to fight your own general." The officer tried to speak. Patton raised one hand. Silence. Patton's real response. There was no public humiliation, no dramatic arrest in front of the troops. Instead, Patton turned to a waiting aide. "Reassign him, immediately. Rear logistics in England, effective today." It was over. Career finished. Reputation gone. No court-martial spectacle. Just quiet removal. Because Patton understood something most didn't. The Army needed confidence, not scandal. The last line. As the officer was escorted away, Patton returned to the ridge, watching the advance. One of his staff officers approached cautiously. "Sir, how did you know?" Patton didn't look away from the battlefield. "Because," he said, "the enemy in front of me is dangerous." A beat. "But the enemy who whispers is predictable." American armor rolled forward under the gray sky, and inside Patton's command. There were no more whispers.